Welcome to Season 3 of the Knack 4 Business Podcast. Over 300 episodes strong, we're here to ignite your entrepreneurial spirit with fresh insights, networking gems, and creative strategies that elevate your game. Are you ready to discover what your Knack 4 business truly is? Your hosts are Bernie Fransgrote from Creative Insight and Wayne Pratt from Motivate You, Inc.
Today's topic is chaos to clarity, leadership lessons. What this podcast is about is how can you make confident business decisions when everything else around you feels uncertain? And that's what our guest is about today, Dr. Keith Deats from Recreate. Keith is founder of Recreate, a seasoned business leader with a doctorate in business economics from the University College of Cork. His diverse background includes roles as a conscript in counterinsurgency, diamond prospector, bush pilot, and agricultural economist. He has led multinational food processing operations, managed rural trading stores, and owned a major contracting division. With experience across 4 continents and 6 countries, Dr. Deats specializes in connecting CEOs and business leaders with their teams to unlock collective potential and drive sustainable growth. A firm believer in humanity's potential, experiential knowledge, and the value of diversity. He now offers business growth and leadership programs through Recreate, blending his rich experience with the world's top thought leadership. Keith, welcome back. This is our 3rd podcast where you're the guest, and actually 4th podcast overall. And do you have a favorite quote or saying you want to impart with the audience?
Favorite quote or saying? Chaos offers opportunity.
So with everything happening in the world, political shifts, economic instability, global conflicts, how should business leaders take this in and look at what's happening outside? And how can they transform their perception to engage the everyday work? Because what happens outside affects what happens internally, business-wise.
It's a good question, Bernie. I think what happens, honestly, is we're so conditioned to follow our leaders, right? That we almost blindly accept that by following them, the world will be a greater place. So when you get disruption, most people become pretty confused. Instead of it being a negative, it's actually an opportunity to explore what is actually going on in that particular person's mind. I'm of the opinion that unless people actually know a little bit more about each other, and you will recall from the previous workshop where we spoke about our biases and when we start generating biases. Our biases go back to probably pre the womb. We become more conscious of them as we grow up, only because of the cultures, religions, and nationalistic attitudes that we imbibe as part of our development. Then what we do is we learn to follow a leader, regardless of whether that leader is actually a good leader or not. Then along comes the elephant in the room, the recent American elections, and the man Trump, who is a complete disruptor. It's inherent in him as a person, and it seems to be an inherent trait in many American minds. And he comes and he says something to us which is very different to what we used to. We then decide, okay, that's fine. And he goes from 0 to becoming a hero. So for me, biases are a very important aspect of our makeup, and we need to listen to them.
So would you find that normally we don't touch on politics per se, but when you find someone whose source in the past has come from the media shows, and the reason that you will draw to a show is because there's some sort of conflict, and then the conflict gets resolved. Is that an artificial state, in which case it just blows things out of proportion for the rest of us because we're not used to seeing that disproportion of activity? Or is it truly a change in leadership? In other words, I just look at it differently. If you go to another country and the culture says approach things a certain way versus Western culture, if I go from east to west, things are seen directly opposite. In one culture, you smile, it means something's good. Another culture, not so good. Looking at here?
Absolutely. I think we're not fully understanding the things that conflict us, the things that are contradictory and ambiguous and different to our way of knowing will always cause us some kind of discomfort. Okay. The fact is that unless we're actually starting to get into some kind of a conversation about understanding ourselves and our discomfort with another person's view, whether it's an international, global view, or whether it's a national view, or whether it's a local view. The conditioning is to accept it, right, in society, because that way that you get a job and you're seen as a good lad and you can move on with your life. But nowhere in that are people encouraging each other to understand a little bit more about each other by getting into the space of really letting people know what they think and understanding what the other person might think as well. So what happens is we don't really get to know the other person. We don't get to know what the other person's point of view is, whether it's political, economic, culture, or religion. And we then shut down the experiential and knowledge seeking part of ourselves, and then nothing changes. In other words, we live in a fixed world, a world of fixed views. We decide that we're right, the other person is wrong, and there's nothing in the middle that needs to be explored. So in my world, ambiguity, complexity, which is the new modern world, opposition, different points of view are actually the opportunity for people to learn about us, or me, and us to learn about them. And then that we can actually say, all right, now that we know this about each other, what next?
Keith, I know you're a big student of history.
I am.
What is it, if it looks like history is repeating itself, how do we learn from it? How do we keep from playing the same movie again and again?
That's a very good question. Through inquiry, are you with me? So if history has seen this rinse, to repeat, rinse, wash, that's unless we're wanting to understand that will repeat itself, it may have impacted on our minds and the way we think. Unless we are prepared to challenge the way we think by engaging with each other, regardless of whether it's, and I know Bernie doesn't want to talk about politics, but regardless of whether it's a political leader or not, if those things remained unchallenged in our minds, right, nothing will change. We will live in the world of status quo. So we accept that, and we therefore never want to change it, because there seems to be some kind of rather unpopular view that if you actually speak up and talk out from an emotional and cognitive point of view, and you give your point of view, you're probably going to come up with some kind of reprisal. So therefore, nothing changes. The idea then is to say, hang on, there are people in the world who do that differently. And more recently, we've seen it after the American election, where whoever is speaking is actually saying, I completely challenge that. I completely challenge that authority, right or wrong. It's just been challenged. So we then have to question whether our biases are still in charge, or whether we're actually open enough to be able to understand that other person's point of view may be more workable. That's when disruption actually works. Disruption in its own is not a negative. There have been good disruptors and bad disruptors. Disruption means disrupting the way we think and believe that the status quo needs to change. It could be a very positive outcome in the short and long term.
Disruption is an interesting thing. It takes me back to the previous question. If you're doing disruption just to say something outlandish and you don't really care, that's one of the key cornerstones. Even now, globally, there's a virus affecting livestock. But here in politics, here in Canada, 3-word phrases, and it's trigger words. And okay, and now you got my attention. What's the rest of the story? What's the real story? I find that as a bait. It doesn't have any meat behind it. So I understand challenging the status quo, but what then?
Yeah.
It's like saying there's a problem, but you offer no solution. Or the solution you offer is harmful.
I honestly believe it's got to do with the human condition. Are you with me? Yeah, it's got to do with how we were raised to think and how we socialized to think. If you look at some of the disruptors in the world that have now changed the course of many things, okay? Jeff Bezos would be one of them, who jokingly was talking recently about when he sold his first book, he sold it to somebody in Bulgaria. The guy couldn't pay for it because they didn't have the internet. So what he did is he folded 2 $100 bill notes into a floppy disk and posted it to him. They received it and posted the book back to him. And that was his first transaction. It was like they decided, hang on, I'll just do this. If you want to talk about a disruptor, he has completely taken supply chain and the goods and services supply to a different level. If he had not done that, Amazon would not have existed. And the same thing with Elon Musk. When we were kids, we used to have these battery-powered cars, remote-controlled cars that we used to drive around. Okay? He changed the face of motoring right around the world. This is the way we do it. The other thing, strangely, is that there seems to be a movement, and you will know from our workshops, where the moment you get into politics and political leadership, people seem to want to think that they can separate that from economics. Are you with me? When in fact, they are inextricably linked. So it's about understanding what certain leaders can do at a political level, economically, right, around the globe, and what they can do locally and nationally. And we started seeing that there are certain things that are just not working. People are actually looking for votes, winning elections, changing nothing. I'm arguing a different perspective. Winning the votes because I'm understanding what the voter wants economically. In other words, what comes into my pocket and what that will mean for me in terms of cost of living, how I will live, how much money will I have in my pocket, can I send my kids to college? Unfortunately, those issues have become tighter and tighter. We all remember the pandemic, where we were all sitting at home wondering about where the next cent was coming from. So there are some realities here which need to be confronted. The disruptor and chaos give birth to new ideas, becomes far more innovative. We're starting to see people that are far more flexible and adaptive, and they're able to ride this wave very productively. And to be clear, I've just been working through my dissertation again, wondering why I wrote it. And every one of the enterprises that I was involved in, there was a clear amount of disruption and chaos that had to be dealt with, which offered the opportunity, which grew those businesses right out of their skins.
One thing that interests me from talking to Bernie puts me in front of a lot of interesting people. You've been a diamond miner, a bush pilot, in the military, and academia. I find that there's a lot of both classism and tribalism, and in your case, more about tribes than most people. But has there been any pushback where, hey, my dad and I were both plumbers, so I don't want to talk to anyone in university? How do you blend so fluidly between cultures and classes?
I was a very lucky man. I grew up on a vast estate with servants, and we were considered the economic and social elite. We had like stables and tennis courts and swimming pools and billiard rooms and guest houses and you name it. We had it all, and a whole horde of servants running around. But I had an issue with the way people were being treated. I had a problem with the fact that I was a white guy in a black man's country, believe it or not. And I had all the privilege, and they actually just lived in huts. And they were actually very badly treated. Back the system from then on. Are you with me? Because I grew to have a huge affinity for people. And I found myself very intimidated by my fellow white folks in an apartheid thing. So I always looked to escape, right, to find some other way of making meaning or sense of my life. But I also had this penchant. I would sit up in the servants' quarters, believe it or not, late at night studying. And I used to read a lot. And I used to ask a lot of questions, not the kind of questions that were welcomed by my family, because as far as they were concerned, you're a white guy, these are black people, you shouldn't be asking these questions. But I kept on asking the questions all through my life. So then my way of escaping it was to get into the bush. Okay? And I actually started working for an American company as a diamond prospector. I spent time in the field with a lot of black guys who were my crew. And I discovered these guys actually knew more about how to run the crews than I did. I'd just been parachuted in there. So they became my teachers. When I went to college, I landed in a tribal area in the Eastern Cape of South Africa, working amongst Mandela's people, the young students from the local university. Their curious minds, my curiosity around them, it actually started developing a certain thing. We were very effective as a crew. We were highly inclusive and we were very supportive of each other. I just looked at this and I thought, but that's not what they're teaching me at university. That's not what they're teaching me at college. So then I had to pursue it in a different way. My way of pursuing it was to find some source of academia that would help me say, this is a theory. This is how I make meaning of life. Is this viable? And she wrote a dissertation. I was one of 6 people that finished that course. You can actually work with anybody at any level, blue collar or white collar. And if you actually work with them, they will let you know what they want and you can help them embrace what they want and become successful in their own rights. I've left a trail of wealthy people behind me who were nowhere on the planet. That kind of drives me because it gives me a purpose and it gives me that idea of saying, all right, we can do better and better. Everything that we deal with politically, everything that we deal with economically, if we embrace it as individuals through a collective, we can actually come up with something slightly better and just make sure that it's a journey. And you just keep on traveling the journey.
Status quo. It's comfortable for some, but not for all. A bias can be wrapped in the status quo.
Yeah.
When you're running a business, if you're running the shop and you're going, status quo is we're generating widgets, we're generating revenue. Why should I change? How does a person go, my bias is blocking my line of sight here or clouding my vision? Should I have a disruption? But some corporations hire people to come in and shake things up. And we've identified a problem. Maybe the revenues have dropped or production's down, whatever the case might be. And you're here to make it work again, get it back to that level of status quo. How do you A, figure it out, and B, are you on the right path? Did you drop a bias, but you picked up a new one and you're no further ahead? Is there a moral compass that gets attached to this journey? Is it shareholder happiness? How do you fit that in as a big bubble?
Well, the funny thing is that I was never fixated on shareholder happiness at all. I was fixated on what people wanted. They had these wants and desires deeply embedded in their souls, and they were never allowed to talk about it. And then along comes the farm boy from Africa, and he says, let's talk about this. One of the things that fell into my lap is a lot of distressed businesses. I'm talking about distress. There were large multinationals. They didn't know where to go anymore, what to do, purely because guys were wanting to maintain the status quo. The status quo in their minds meant I have a job, a cool car, kids at private schools. When in fact, the paradox, that is exactly the thing that needed to be shaken up. In other words, we become incredibly comfortable in our own skins. And I think that what happened for me is, as a young man growing up, I always used to sit in a corner under a tree somewhere in the heat. And I used to often sit and smile to myself. I said to myself, you know what? You can actually walk out the gate with a full of dollars and start a business. And I was happy in my skin that I could do that. Right? When everybody else was bemoaning their lot because they were caught up in some kind of dynamic that they just needed to keep their jobs and were anxious about, I discovered a different thing for myself. If the worst comes to the worst, I can walk out the gate and start a business. I can take a piece of paper and start that business. On 2 or 3 occasions, I did. I took a fistful of dollars and I went out there and started a business. Some did well, some did very well, some didn't do well at all. But what happens is I knew that it's sitting and feeling comfortable and maybe even sad and anxious in a corner on my own. How would I get there? I was lucky because my greatest coaches were people in the tribes, and the fact that I had to cover an enormous amount of ground to find a diamond or 2 or maybe 3. It was just that thing about, here's the idea, go and do it. And he did it. And I think that's badly missing. And the world today is we're all waiting for somebody to save us. There's going to be a rescuer somewhere. There's no rescuer, there's you. You get up, you go. If you can find good company for the journey, that's even better, right? Especially somebody who's got experience and who's actually run businesses and grown them. I have a recent case where one of my clients had the best year he ever had. He's got a multi-million-dollar business. He made himself $1 million and he's probably going to make himself $2 million next year. He had a complete meltdown, not stopping for a minute to say, hang on, I've never been here. The mind is a funny thing. It can entrap you. It can do a lot of things that it shouldn't be doing. Okay? You free up your mind and understand what is possible. You can do as many things as you want. And if you look at disruption, is basically your mind being freed up from how it's been conditioned to believe life should be.
Something you tapped into that I want to explore deeper. You have corporately, if you do the resume, got to the mountaintop a couple of times with the cars and the secretaries and the bigger houses, and either familial events or external events took you off that mountain. And the thing that I find interesting is maybe other than some pouting for a week, I don't know how long, you choose to pivot, shake off, and come back. I run into people that all they are their T4s, and if they just have no depth. I want your feedback on that.
I guess it's not how I see life, but that's a personal thing. I've made millions, and like you say, I've had the cars and done the travel and flitted around the world first class and met some really big movers and shakers. But that's not how I connected to them. I just connected to them because I was curious about them and curious about how they lived and how these things made meaning to them. I was more curious about passion for people and how people can do anything that can go into the world of almost impossible and make it possible. I don't think there's a major issue with my bank balance, whether I have one or not. It used to be a driving force is to build that bank balance so that I have more money, more cars, bigger houses, and more beautiful women than the next man or woman. This is a modern world. That's not the driver anymore. The driving for me is to get people to really understand and that they actually do matter. And that if they go out there with the right support, they can actually do as well as they want to do. The thing that was missing in my life is that I didn't have a good coach. I had one or two really good mentors, and they certainly made a difference. They just made a huge difference in my life. Shells don't have pockets. If I get to the end of this life, I'm going to only ask one question. Was I doing what I was enjoying? Were people benefiting from it? All my clients that actually stayed with my programs are in places that they've never been before, which is scary for a lot of them because it was feast and famine. Now they've actually got to a place where I had a client last year who paid himself $1 million in dividends, which in Canadian dollars would be 2 million. Are you with me? But if I get to the place where he did get it, I know that he worked damn hard for it and he's struggling with deservingness around it. Because there's a religious thing in there somewhere that says, I've got to take care of the whole world. I'm saying take care of yourself and then you can take care of the whole world.
It's interesting you mentioned that was trained up for hazmat training. The instructor says, listen, you look into a room and everybody's slumped over and you got no equipment with you and everybody's slumped in over in that room. So something adverse has happened in that room. He says, don't run into the room and grab people out because you'll add to the list of people slumped over in the room. Which kind of brings me back to a couple of things here. One is the ethos. What is your ethos? From you growing up in South Africa, you going, parents tell me one thing, then I see the folks, this is their land. This is from whence they came. And now you're getting more stories. There's an empathy piece happening in there. There's a collaboration piece in there. There's a curiosity of the cat coming in. So you explore that. The ethos inside you, is that part of the driver for a leader? If your ethos is in the wrong direction, it could be a blinder. If money is the end all and be all, then you're missing out on stuff. Or you end up having guilt, to have that Scrooge effect happening to you downstream. Comes Christmas and go, like, little Timmy ain't going to make it. Is that ethos the driver?
And it's a good question. For me, the ethos is sticking with values that really worked. I've looked hard at things that worked for me and didn't work for me, successes and failures. The funny thing is I was actually caught up with this whole thing that in order for me to be a success, I needed to be acknowledged by my peers. And then I got to another part of my life and I said, that's absolutely the most irrelevant way of thinking at all, okay? Inhibited my boldness. It inhibited my freedom. That is, to me, one of the biggest ethoses I live by. You will understand that by attending my workshops. I'm not prepared to stand on ceremony. I know that some of the most successful businessmen, if you want to call it that, right, around the globe, didn't stand on ceremony. They actually just said, I'm going to do something bold because I'm freed up in my own mind to do that. And then they went for it. Most of them didn't find the journey easy, but they still went for it and came out the other end successful. And they continued to build success on top of success. The one thing that I will not entertain in my life is fraudsters and charlatans and people of low moral character, right? So I'm very clear about that. And believe me, I've met quite a few of those along the way. You'll be surprised about who they may be. I always used to say, I gave the best that I could, and this is how it landed up. Learn from it quickly and move on. I know that right now in the world we exist today, if I actually do the right thing, wear the right tie, put the arm around the right person, I could have a gloriously paid corporate career. That's fine. I'm happy with that. So long as we get the values right, because I've seen way too much of it. And I know you don't like the politics thing, but we've seen what's happened in North America and we've seen what's happening here in the UK where I live. Michael O'Leary, he owns the biggest airline, one of the biggest airlines in the world, Ryanair, actually been interviewed where he actually was so outspoken. I'm talking about the local chancellor, saying that she's delivered on nothing but rubbish. Okay? Now, for that guy to talk that openly about a country that supports his airline would be considered absolute heresy. Yet he said it and he means it. He continues to grow his airline, the most popular in Europe. And you know what? When I listened to him talk, I was absolutely over the moon because I use Ryanair frequently. It's like getting on a public bus. It takes you an hour or two and you can be anywhere in Europe for the price of a bottle of whiskey. And I'm just thinking about the word effective. And he's been hammered for so much, none of which is stuck. So, that whole idea of being free, being able to challenge authority, regardless of where it is, and to be able to create something that is meaningful. And that's all he said when he entered. Is it in 2025, 500 million people would have got on my airplanes and crisscrossed Europe. He won't stop at anything. As far as he's concerned, I'm going to be flying into Ukraine and Russia and Canada and the US. When our minds are freed up, we're capable of quite a lot of things.
How many disruptors can you have in a given space? You think of a company, everybody wants to be a disruptor. That's the differentiator. But inside a business space, a corporation, can you say more than one?
Because a disruptor is not a stupid person. A disruptor is somebody, and I've heard it said that they are on the other side of the spectrum. They will do things that most people wouldn't consider doing because they're inhibited by federal law or the government or their socialization or the way things should be. If they don't change their thinking or challenge the status quo, they are of the idea they won't have jobs, they'll be ostracized by society. But that world has changed. When you start doing this type of thing, the world strangely, paradoxically, sits up and listens and says, wait a minute. What? And then you win elections. And unfortunately, it's a conditions thing. It's taught in universities. It's taught at colleges. Follow what I say, do what I say, regurgitate what I say, and you'll get your degree. I was educated differently. I went to an Irish university, and the first words that they said to me is, don't you be pretentious here, boy. Okay? And I used to laugh because one woman was a Harvard associate professor, and the other guy was a Cornell professor. Disruption needs to be looked at in context. Context for me means this is not working. It's continuing to not work. Something needs to change. What needs to change? Let's make that change and let's run with it. And that's where the mind gets freed up.
One thing as a podcaster, one of my goals is a word I hear from you a lot is curiosity. And one thing that I know how easy it is to get siloed by your culture, by your job, by your family, and by your trade. What 2 or 3 questions can you have people ask themselves to open their mind to be more curious?
The biggest question that I would ask myself is, what do I want? Not what does my wife want? What do my friends want? What does society want from me? What do I want? And the second one is knowing what I want, what will drive me towards that outcome. And the third one is who will be good company for the journey. Every time I've reached the pinnacle of career or business success, it was always about what I want, what the other guy wants, what's going to drive me and energize me. And the third one is how did we both come out of that better off than where we started? Are you with me? It's just, all right, this worked or it didn't work. Okay. I didn't quite answer the third question properly. What is the third question again?
If you're trapped by the box, how do you think out of the box?
How do you think out of the box? I think you think out of the box by sitting with yourself and asking yourself what's really possible. I heard more recently somebody saying, stop messing around. Think about the boldest thing that you can do and contact that person and talk to him. There was somebody recently, I think it was Steve Jobs, who was a kid. He was trying to develop some product and he got hold of the head honcho. He wrote the head honcho at Hewlett Packard a letter.
But he actually phoned him.
That's right. He was a Steve Jobs, I think.
Yeah.
And the guy answered the phone and he said, I need this. Can you help? And the guy said, yeah. What a bold move. A kid phoning the head honcho and saying, I've got some ideas. And the guy said, yeah, what do you need? And the rest is history. Some of those bold moves are really important because our minds aren't that freed up because we don't believe that we can deal with authority like that. But when you actually move into the space of dealing with authority as a person that you can actually ask to give you a leg up or help you, suddenly your world changes, absolutely changes.
Success. That bold move depends on other factors. Like you said, listen, you sit back and you go, what do I want to do next? If I'm a Steve Jobs as a kid, Steve Jobs as a 20-year-old, Steve Jobs as a 50-year-old, all of a sudden you realize your age will dictate, what do I want to do next? If you're talking about life-changing events, I want to do physical exercise. I want to learn a martial arts. And so what do I got to do to make that happen? It's slightly a bit different than I want to change what the business is doing. It's going hard left, hard right. I'm going to make something that's blue instead of green today. Whatever the case is. How do you know that you got to do something? I get that piece. But how do you put it in context then in the impact to other people? All right. There's impact to yourself, right? You got to find that inner happiness. I get that component. But now I'm about to, I don't know, let's go on a high rich, fat, high cholesterol diet for the household. That's not going to be a good thing for the kids. Candy floss for everybody. Yeah. We both know that's not going to work because sugar high, diabetes, rotting teeth. How do you find that whatever you're going to propose isn't going to totally make you happy, but wreck everything else around you?
The last part of your question is really good. If you're going to tiptoe around society and worry about wrecking things, then don't do it because it means you're already stopping the free flow of your own ideas because you're worried about alienating or annoying somebody else. If you look at the entrepreneurs we know of, mostly Americans, and they were thinking like that. If you're constantly tiptoeing and dancing on eggs around somebody else, you will never do it. You will stop there and that's the end of it. And I think in psychology, they call that the rescuer, the savior. I'm here to take care of you. Forget about me. Your own potential is completely inhibited. You don't have any way of fully realizing yourself. The religious fathers will tell you that there's a life beyond that. The question I will ask myself is, did I fulfill my life? When I set out on this journey, did I actually fulfill it? Did I get what I wanted from it? Am I going to be judged by the fact that I'm a billionaire or a multimillionaire? And I've known to ask those questions and answer them every week. One of my newest questions is, what have I done to move myself and my business forward this week? If I can answer honestly that I have done something to move it forward, and I could say, yeah, maybe I haven't moved it forward in the way that I wanted to. It's causing me a certain amount of frustration. All right, so what is it that I need to change? And that's why I think disruption is important. Because disruption actually does question your biases and it helps you question yourself. and helps you ask better questions.
Actually, at the end of the day, I agree with you. Is there something more I can do? What are my goals? What are my next steps? I totally agree with it. I'm just worried that sometimes, let's say I'm about to make a new product. Unfortunately, it's going to poison the well. It's a disruption with lingering impacts, not just for myself. For example, you hear about the forever chemicals, right? And it's, oh my gosh, how did we get there? And it's trying to capture and negate a prolonged issue. That said, on a small business scale, I think asking the disruptions, create the disruptor inside yourself, all right, and shake the biases is important. Over to you.
Something that I get excited by is finding out what people's true character is. Not so much what they say, but who they are. And sometimes it takes being betrayed to understand, and sometimes you just know. But how do you investigate character in someone early in a relationship?
That is a seriously good question. I actually don't know the answer to that one because I would always have, given my upbringing, been raised by black servants, right? Who were people of incredible character. They're very soft, very decent, very resilient people who had endured unspeakable conditions and were treated very badly. The thing that I always enjoyed about them was the fact that they would always have the time for you, and they would always have a smile on their faces, and they would always be strangely positive about, oh, that's just who that person is. Okay. Now, when we moved into the Western world, as we know it, I actually found a very different type of character. They would sell you out for sixpence because they were very driven by, they need to be in control, that they need to make, that they need to be up there. But I haven't let it spoil me. What I've done is I've stayed with the true character of staying open, transparent, vulnerable to an extent. And I've actually had to work into the world of this is what I do and this is what I do well. People benefit from it. Not just business owners that benefit from it, it's the employees that benefit from it as well. And I understand that it's a means to an end, but it's not the end in itself. They may get to a point where they decide there's no value in it anymore. That does not mean that I devalue myself. Are you with me? It puts me in a place where I say, okay, good job. I dust myself off, get up and say, right, next. Will I be a wealthy man? Talking about materially wealthy man? Probably. Is it a driving force? Not really. But you know what? I always felt that, I always feel and still feel that if you do you are well with yourself and well with the people that you work with. And of course, there got to be boundaries in there. If you're dealing with thugs, just leave them alone. And I've had that experience more than once. And you just walk away and you say, lesson learned. How would you know whether that character will turn up? There isn't a finite way that character will turn up because when you first meet them, they're going to tell you what you want to hear. And you may be thinking that you need to tell them what they need to hear from you. I've changed that dynamic. Tell me more. Give me more. And then somewhere in that early conversation, I would say, I don't think that's going to work for me. Okay. And then you've got to learn to walk away. It's a discipline. And it's a discipline of your own character.
You have a very different way of offering adult education. You let people dip their toe in and then go all the way to certification. Can you tell me about what you're doing now and how to get a hold of you?
Yeah, they could just contact me either through Bernie or through your good selves. The idea of certification was to say to them, well, if you want to understand leadership and entrepreneurship, this is the way that we do it. This is how we educate people because it's adult education, so it's peer-to-peer. You learn it from each other. There's a few good articles that come out of there, mostly from American universities like Harvard and MIT. Can you integrate this into your practices? Do some reflection work, work in your groups with each other. And at the end of the day, if you've got a grip on it and work through the material, you may have found one improvement for yourself. So the certification is not to get a passing grade and regurgitate something for some professor or some guy called Dr. Keith Deats. The idea is that you engaged with the issue, you understood something about it, you went into discussion, you learned from each other, and you come out there probably having learned something about yourself and the other person.
I want to say thank you, Dr. Keith Deats, my co-host, Wayne Pratt, and you, the Knack for Business listeners. If you're looking for disruptions in your life in a good way, in other words, shake things up. You realize you might be running in a rut, whether you're running a business, personal life, understanding how to manage folks, reach out to Keith, attend one of his sessions. It's really insightful. I've been involved with him for the last couple years. I've learned a lot. It keeps you honed into that space.
To reach the podcast hosts, email them at info@creativeinsight.com or by the website creativeinsight.com, spelled KREATIVISIGHT.com. To reach Wayne at his email, wayne@motive8u.ca, that is MOTIVE, the numeral 8 and the letter u.ca, or his website, motive8u.ca. If you would like to be a guest on this podcast and share your knowledge, let us know. We would also appreciate your feedback on the content or format. Check the show notes for more details. For these podcasts, we like to acknowledge the support and thanks to the following people. Carl Richards from Podcast Solutions Made Simple, a renowned podcast expert. Fred Crouch, who is the Property Wizard podcaster, where Bernie is a co-host. Jovan Strika from At Hive, a co-working space that is more than just a space. Then Melanie Weber, Bernie's invaluable business partner, and Wayne Pratt from Motive 8U Inc., who serves as both a coach and co-host of these podcasts. Disclaimer. Please note that the Knack for Business podcast episodes are meant solely for educational and general informational purposes. The information and opinions contained within are not intended to be professional advice on any subject matter. The thoughts, views, and opinions expressed by the participants are their own personal beliefs and do not represent the views of the podcast hosts or any affiliated organizations. It is important to note that this podcast is not a replacement for consulting with certified experts in your area who possess knowledge of your unique situation. The hosts of the podcast, along with any participants or affiliated groups, do not take responsibility for any actions taken or not taken based on the information presented in this episode. It is highly recommended that individuals seek guidance from their own personal advisors in fields such as accounting, law, or other pertinent areas prior to undertaking any actions or making decisions that may impact their financial, legal, or other aspects of life.